In a few previous videos, I had talked about experimenting with a calcium acetate fertilizer that I was trying to use as an in-furrow application to potato plants. And then in my latest video on this topic, I documented how the calcium acetate did not seem to be benefiting the potato plants. In fact, it seemed to be detrimental, given with how the state of the plants was and how they weren't really growing very large or very well. And so I just kind of want to sum this part of the topic up with what the yield count was, just kind of a general idea. I'm not going to be working with exact numbers in this video, but the main point was just to kind of see what kind of effect overall it has on yield. So like I said, I had 3 different sections of potatoes in this bed. So I have group 3A, which did not receive any calcium amendment. Then I had group 3B, which received the calcium carbonate amendment in the form of ground up eggshell powder. And then I had group 3C, which was the homemade calcium acetate fertilizer amendment. And so I just kind of based my observation off of these 3 groups. So unfortunately, when I was harvesting group 3A, right, the unfertilized potatoes, the camera shut off on me, so I didn't actually get a full look, not on camera anyway, of that yield of potatoes. But I can say that from what I saw with my own eyes, that pile seemed to be pretty comparable to the calcium carbonate fertilized potatoes, right? Being that there wasn't really much difference between those two. I also noticed that the size of the potatoes were generally much larger in groups 3A and 3B rather than group 3C, which kind of matches up, given that 3C, which of course was the calcium acetate applied section, that the plants were smaller, not quite as lively, and as a result that produced potatoes which were smaller and not quite as abundant. So this study, as unofficial and anecdotal as it is, it seems to be that so far the calcium carbonate and the unfertilized potatoes don't really seem to have much of a yield difference or a growth difference when talking about the plants, which could inform me that the potatoes aren't really benefiting from any extra calcium amendment, or at least not in the carbonate form. And again, you know, I'm going off of my eyes, right? Visually, there is no difference, right? Chemically or biochemically, maybe there are some more nuanced, you know, specific differences that my eyes might not be able to pick up. But it didn't affect any meaningful difference in growth or productive yield. However, when we look at the calcium acetate amendment, this amendment seemed to be overall detrimental, right? The plants didn't grow as well, and the plants were not as productive. And also the plants in this section, when they were growing, it did seem to encourage the growth of certain other plants we might refer to as weeds in this context, right? The lamb's quarters and the amaranth. And maybe this could tell you something about the effect that the calcium acetate, even in that small quantity, has on the soil health, with its potential antibacterial activity and encouraging the growth of other plants that may not necessarily directly depend on a lot of microflora in the soil, namely lamb's quarters and amaranth. So in moving forward from this experience, definitely more research needs to be done, right? Maybe my calcium acetate amounts or measurements were too large and it just kind of overwhelmed the potato plants and the surrounding soil, producing that negative effect. Maybe a smaller quantity could prove to be beneficial. Now also, maybe the form of calcium is a factor in this too, right? Maybe the calcium acetate isn't a great fertilizer for potato plants. Maybe something else, like maybe a calcium citrate or something like that, might benefit these plants more. And maybe I'll do an experiment on that in the future. Now, the other possibility is maybe calcium acetate is more effectively applied as a foliar application than a soil application, but you also have bacterias and a phylosphere of life on the leaf surface, which could maybe wipe that out too and prove to be detrimental in other ways. But maybe it's more about the dose. So anyway, there are a lot of questions to be answered, a lot of research to be done, but I'm gonna cut this video off here, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Maybe you'll be inspired to do some experimentation or research on some of this stuff on your own. And if you do, definitely feel free to let me know in the comments what your experiences with this is, if you try something like this, or if you have like knowledge about some more of this stuff. On that note, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Take care.